A man kept staring at her on the train, then started following her for days. She was terrified, until he finally spoke, and what he revealed broke her to the core. Stay with us, because this isn't the story you think it is. It will challenge everything you believe about fear, trust, and the people we overlook. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Naomi Bell didn't believe in fear, not the irrational kind. At 32, she'd faced too many real emergencies to get spooked by shadows. A full-time trauma nurse at Hopeview Medical Center in Eastwood, Georgia, Naomi had spent nearly a decade running toward crises most people ran from. Calm under pressure, sharp in a storm. That's who she was. But lately, even Naomi had begun to feel the cracks. Her shifts had grown longer, the nights heavier, and the quiet walk home from the hospital had started to feel less like a cool-down and more like a fragile breath before the next blow. The only part of her routine that gave her any pause was the Briarwood line, the evening metro she boarded to escape downtown. That Tuesday evening, she stepped onto the train like she had 100 times before. Cold air, fluorescent lights, packed seats, nothing unusual. She slipped into her corner by the window, earbuds in, fingers still stained faintly with antiseptic. And then she saw him. A man stood at the far end of the carriage, mid to late 30s, medium build, a navy cap casting shadow over his eyes. He wasn't looking around like the rest of the crowd. He was still, unnaturally still, and he was staring straight at her. At first, Naomi thought maybe he'd seen someone behind her. She shifted slightly, stealing a glance over her shoulder. Nothing but the back wall of the carriage. When she turned back, his eyes were still locked on hers. She offered a polite, tight-lipped smile, a silent signal that she'd noticed. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just kept watching her with an unreadable intensity. The carriage rocked gently as the train sped through the tunnel, but the man never looked away. Naomi turned up the volume in her earbuds. She told herself not to overthink it. People were weird. Trains were weirder. He'd probably get off in a stop or two and disappear into the noise. By the time the train pulled into her station, he had, but the feeling didn't leave her. As she stepped onto the platform, the air outside felt colder than it should. Her boots echoed a little too loudly on the pavement. She kept walking, telling herself to breathe, to shake it off. But the whole way home, the weight of unseen eyes pressed against her back. When she finally locked her apartment door behind her, she leaned against it longer than usual. She didn't know it yet, but that man wasn't gone, and tomorrow he'd be back. The following morning was ordinary in all the ways Naomi had hoped. She made her usual coffee, packed her stethoscope and hand lotion, and left for the early shift. The sun was barely up as she boarded the Briarwood line again. Half-awake commuters hunched over their phones, dozing or scrolling. Naomi stood near the middle doors, resting her head against the cool metal pole. Then, without warning, a ripple of cold crept down her spine. She looked up. The man was there, same cap, same stillness, same unblinking eyes fixed on her from across the carriage. Her pulse quickened. He hadn't even tried to be subtle. While everyone else faded into the train's blur of gray and noise, he stood out like a silent alarm. Naomi's hand tensed around her bag strap. She stared at the floor, fighting the urge to glance again. The ride couldn't end fast enough. When the train screeched into her stop, she moved quickly, pushing through the crowd, barely waiting for the doors to fully open. As she stepped onto the platform, she dared a glance back. He didn't follow, not this time. The rest of her day passed in a blur of bandages, IVs, and code calls. Naomi kept her mind on the patients, on her hands, on routine. But somewhere in the background, the memory of his face remained, like a shadow taped to the edges of her thoughts. By the end of her shift, her stomach was tight with dread. She stayed late, tidied the nurse's station, took a long, slow inventory of the storage closet, anything to delay the trip home. But eventually, she had to leave. The hospital doors hissed shut behind her, and the night air greeted her with the same sharp bite. She reached the metro station. The platform was quieter now, less crowded. As the train rolled in, her chest tightened. He was there, again, same spot, same stare. But this time, when she got off, so did he. Naomi's breath shortened. She moved fast, cutting through side streets. Every time she turned a corner, she hoped to lose him. But no matter how many alleys she took, how many hurried steps she made, when she looked back, he was there. Always just far enough to not cause a scene, always close enough to never disappear. He wasn't just watching her now, he was following. Naomi's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She didn't care if it sounded crazy. She was ready to call the police. But just as her thumb hovered over 911, her foot hit an uneven slab of sidewalk. She tripped hard. Her phone skidded across the pavement into the dark. She scrambled to her feet, breathless, hands scraped. She grabbed the phone, turned back, ready to run. But he was gone. Just like that. Gone. Naomi locked the door behind her and threw the deadbolt into place with a trembling hand. She hadn't even taken off her shoes. Her heart was pounding too loudly to think straight, but instinct told her what to do. She moved quickly through the apartment, turning off lights and pulling every curtain shut, leaving just a narrow gap at the edge of the window. Enough to see, enough to be sure. He was still there. Across the street, under the flickering glow of the street lamp, the man stood facing her building. He wasn't moving. He wasn't pacing. He just stared. No phone in hand, no gesture, only stillness, and that unbearable gaze. Naomi's chest tightened. She picked up her phone and dialed the police. Her voice was clipped but composed. She gave her name, her location, and a clear account of what had happened. Twice followed from the train, now being watched from outside her apartment. The dispatcher remained calm and assured her that officers were already en route. Estimated arrival, 15 minutes. She stayed near the window, crouched and still, keeping her eyes on the man. 10 minutes passed. He didn't move. He didn't approach, just watched. Then, without warning, he disappeared. One moment he was there, and the next, the street was empty. Naomi stepped back from the window, barely able to believe it. Her body sagged slightly in relief. She had just begun to catch her breath when there was a knock at the door. It wasn't frantic or aggressive. It was measured, one knock, then another, then silence. Her stomach turned. She moved toward the door cautiously, each step deliberate. When she reached the peephole, what she saw made her heart nearly stop. It was him, standing at her front door. Naomi's instinct was to retreat, but she stood frozen. Then she heard his voice, muffled but clear enough to send another jolt through her. "Naomi, please. I'm not here to hurt you." Her blood turned cold. He had said her name. Her body remained tense, but her mind was racing now for a different reason. He knew who she was. "How do you know my name?" she demanded, voice tight through the door. There was a pause before he answered. "Because you helped me. At Hopeview." "A few weeks ago," he said. Naomi's mind scrambled through faces, files, names, hundreds of patients, dozens of visitors. His didn't register. But his voice wasn't threatening. It sounded strained, worn. She didn't speak. He continued. "I know I scared you. I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to find you. I just need a moment. Please." Naomi stayed behind the door, silent. She wasn't panicking anymore, but she wasn't opening it either. Not yet. Then came the final shift. "It's not about me," the man said. "It's my father. He's dying. You're the only person who treated us like we mattered." Naomi's hand loosened slightly on the doorknob. Her fear hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. She didn't understand what he wanted. But she knew now. He wasn't trying to harm her. He was reaching for something else entirely. Naomi didn't speak. She stood behind the door, frozen in thought, her palms still resting on the knob. The voice outside remained silent now. No pleading, no urgency. Just waiting. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was alert. Cautious, yes. But what she'd heard hadn't sounded like manipulation. It had sounded like grief. She glanced again through the peephole. He hadn't moved. "You said I helped you at the hospital," she called through the door. "I don't remember your face." "I wasn't the patient," he replied. "My father was. I came with him for an appointment a few weeks ago. You were the only one who treated us like people." That line struck something. It was the way he said it. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just tired. She remembered a few faces, fragile older patients with quiet adult children at their sides. Too many for full recall, but the sincerity in his voice cut through the fog. "I'm Jeremiah," he said after a beat. "Jeremiah Cole. My father's name is Walter. He's very sick. No one's been willing to help him. You're the only one who even looked him in the eye." Naomi pressed her forehead lightly to the door. The name still didn't spark memory, but the emotion behind it was impossible to ignore. She could hear it in the tension of his breathing. This wasn't a game. It was something heavier. "Why did you follow me?" she asked, her tone firmer now, not accusing, just needing truth. "I didn't plan it," he said. "When I saw you on the metro that day, I remembered you. And I thought, maybe this is my chance. I tried to get your attention, but I knew how it must have looked. I kept my distance. I never meant to frighten you." Naomi hesitated. The silence between them grew thick. Then, slowly, she undid the top lock. Not the deadbolt, just the first. "If you try anything," she said calmly, "I will scream, and I have a kitchen full of sharp objects." A pause. Then she heard him chuckle softly, not mocking, just exhausted. "I believe you," he said. Naomi opened the door a few inches and stepped halfway into the frame. Her other hand, still holding her phone, hovered near the emergency dial. Jeremiah stood in front of her, taller than she expected, with weary eyes and a face that hadn't seen much rest. There was no threat in his posture, only sadness. She studied him for a few seconds. Then she stepped aside. Jeremiah didn't hesitate. He stepped in slowly, cautiously, keeping his hands in view. Naomi didn't offer a seat, and he didn't ask for one. They stood in the hallway, under soft yellow lighting, surrounded by unopened mail and a faint smell of citrus cleaner. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. "Tell me what this is about," Naomi said. He nodded once, collecting his thoughts before he spoke. "My father's name is Walter Cole. He's 72, a retired school principal. He spent his life in classrooms, even started a reading program for kids in Eastwood before funding got cut. About a year ago, he started losing strength in his legs, then his hands. His voice became shaky. He couldn't hold a pen, couldn't walk without help." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "Neuromuscular?" Jeremiah nodded. "They think it's an advanced degenerative disorder, something rare, maybe autoimmune. We've seen specialists at 5 hospitals. Each time we get a preliminary consultation, but as soon as they learn we're uninsured and can't afford the out-of-pocket costs for experimental treatment, they stop returning our calls." He rubbed a hand across his jaw, clearly trying to hold it together. "We're not freeloaders. I work 2 jobs. My dad was the one who taught half the teachers in this city, but nobody wants to treat a dying man when the money's not guaranteed." Naomi remained quiet. She'd heard stories like this before, but never from someone standing in her hallway, begging her to remember him. "You said I helped you?" she asked softly. Jeremiah looked up. "Yes, at Hopeview, the last hospital that gave us even one appointment. You checked him in. I remember how you spoke to him. Kind, gentle. You called him Mr. Cole when the others just called him the patient in room 3. He remembered that. I did too." Naomi took a breath. She still didn't recall the moment exactly, but she'd seen enough dismissal in medicine to believe it. Sometimes kindness left a stronger mark than medicine ever did. "So why come here? Why follow me home instead of calling the hospital?" she asked. "I did," he said. "No one returned my messages, and when I called to speak with someone in your unit, they said they weren't authorized to discuss patients. I was out of options. I knew it was wrong, following you, but I didn't know what else to do." Naomi crossed her arms. Part of her still felt the residue of fear, but it was fading fast. What remained was the weight of something else, responsibility. Not for what Jeremiah had done, but for what might happen if she didn't listen. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. Jeremiah didn't hesitate. "I want you to come see him, not as a nurse, just as a person. I think if you saw how bad it's gotten, maybe you'd know someone who could help. Maybe you'd speak to someone they'd actually listen to." He wasn't begging. He wasn't demanding. He was asking. Naomi glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was late. She was exhausted. But something in her refused to say no. "Where is he?" she asked. Jeremiah led Naomi down 3 quiet blocks just east of the metro line. The streets were lined with aging brick homes and tall pecan trees, their leaves rustling gently under the night sky. His house sat at the end of a narrow driveway, small, well-kept, but clearly weathered by time. Naomi noticed the cracked steps and the flickering porch light as he unlocked the front door. Inside, the home smelled faintly of antiseptic and chamomile. The furniture was modest, nothing new. A folded quilt lay on the back of a recliner, and a shelf beside the fireplace was packed with books, literature, lesson plans, education journals from another era. It felt lived in, but lately, it had been lived in hard. Jeremiah motioned toward the back room. "He's awake, but barely. Some days are worse than others." Naomi followed quietly, her heart already preparing for what she might see. She had walked into hundreds of patient rooms before, but something about this moment felt different. She wasn't on duty. She wasn't wearing scrubs, and no one had paged her. She was here by choice. In the corner of the dimly lit bedroom sat a hospital bed, well used, with faded rails and a cracked IV pole. An elderly man lay against the pillows, propped up by folded towels and soft cushions. He was thin, alarmingly so. His hands trembled slightly on the blanket, and his chest rose and fell with effort. Yet when he saw Naomi, his face lit up with recognition. "You came," he whispered. Naomi stepped forward slowly. She recognized him now, not his face exactly, but his presence. She had seen that gentle smile once before, maybe in the hallway outside triage. She remembered now the way he had thanked her for calling him by name. "You remember me?" she asked softly. Walter nodded. "You looked me in the eye. That's something, these days." Jeremiah walked to the other side of the bed and gently adjusted his father's pillow. "He's been getting worse by the week. Muscle control, speech, breathing. Every test says he's a candidate for a trial medication, but no one will even submit the paperwork without guaranteed coverage." Naomi looked at the man in the bed, at the deep lines in his face and the quiet dignity he still held. Then she turned back to Jeremiah. "Does he have a primary right now?" Jeremiah shook his head. "Not anymore. The last doctor dropped us after the hospital turned us away." Naomi sat in the nearby chair and folded her hands together. She didn't speak right away. There was no miracle solution, no hospital protocol to follow. She wasn't here in any official capacity. But the feeling in her chest told her something different, something heavy. She couldn't walk away. "I don't know what I can do," she said quietly, "but I promise I'll try." Walter gave a slight smile. Jeremiah looked away, wiping at his eyes without apology. For the first time that night, the house felt still, for the right reasons. Naomi stayed a little longer than she intended that night. She watched as Jeremiah adjusted his father's blanket, offered sips of water, and wiped his forehead with a damp cloth. Walter never complained. His eyes followed his son with quiet trust, as if the worst had already passed, and all that remained was waiting for someone to believe they deserved help. When Naomi finally stood to leave, Jeremiah walked her to the door. He didn't ask if she'd come back. He didn't need to. She nodded once before stepping out, the unspoken agreement hanging between them. That night, she didn't sleep. The next morning, she arrived at Hopeview early, before the ER buzzed to life and before the coffee machines finished humming. She went straight to the break room and made a call to the one person who might know where to begin. Dr. Rochelle Banks had worked in the hospital system for nearly 30 years. She was respected, deeply connected, and unafraid to speak truth to power. Naomi told her everything. About Walter, the follow-ups that never happened, the trial medication hospitals refused to initiate without payment up front. "You're telling me they didn't even submit the case?" Rochelle asked, her voice sharpened with disbelief. "They gave up before they started," Naomi replied. "They told him he didn't meet administrative criteria. That's code for we can't bill you." There was a pause. "Text me the patient's name," Rochelle said. "I'll look into the back channels." Quietly, Naomi hung up with a flicker of hope, but tempered it with realism. She had seen too many patients fall through the cracks. She didn't expect miracles. But by noon, Rochelle had called back with bad news. "No movement," she said. "He's not on any pending review list," which means they never filed a formal consult, and without a primary physician backing the paperwork, he won't even get near the trial registry. Naomi sat in the hallway outside radiology, her scrubs dotted with antiseptic and sweat. She felt the weight of it pressing down, the helplessness, the bureaucracy, the injustice. She made 3 more calls that afternoon, one to a colleague in internal medicine, another to a nurse in a nearby hospital, the third to a caseworker she once helped during a public health initiative. The answers were all the same, sympathetic voices with nothing to offer. Without insurance, without approval, without leverage, the door stayed closed. But Naomi couldn't shake Walter's face, or Jeremiah's voice. That evening, after her shift, she returned to the small house off the metro line. She didn't bring paperwork. She didn't bring solution. She brought pain relief. Jeremiah opened the door with a tired smile. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," Naomi replied. And she did. The next day. And the day after that. When Walter's joints ached, she massaged them. When his muscles seized, she adjusted his position. She helped him eat, helped him sleep, helped him breathe. There was no long-term plan, no medical authority behind her presence. But there was one thing stronger than protocol: compassion. And Naomi refused to let Walter Cole become another forgotten man in a broken system. By the second week, Naomi had carved out a routine. After each long shift at Hopeview, she walked straight to the coal house with a small kit tucked in her tote. It carried basic supplies, sanitary gloves, oral syringes, topical creams, and most critically, prescription-grade painkillers she discreetly pulled from expired inventory. It wasn't legal. It wasn't even close. But Naomi no longer cared. Walter's condition was deteriorating. His hands trembled constantly now, his voice barely rose above a whisper, and even turning his head seemed to cost him strength. Some nights he was lucid and curious, asking her about the hospital, her upbringing, the books she liked to read. Other nights he simply stared at the ceiling, silent, fading. Jeremiah never left his father's side for long. He cooked simple meals, cleaned the medical equipment, and stayed awake through coughing fits and fever spells. There were moments when Naomi walked in and caught him at the bedside holding Walter's hand, whispering things only a son would say in private. They never talked about Naomi's unofficial role, not out loud. But every time she arrived, Jeremiah exhaled a little slower, and Walter's eyes softened just enough to feel like permission. Still, the toll was mounting. Naomi knew she couldn't keep doing this indefinitely. The risk alone could cost her career, maybe more. But whenever she considered pulling back, something would stop her. A quiet thank you from Walter, a silent nod from Jeremiah, or simply the knowledge that no one else was coming. One night, after a particularly long shift involving a multi-vehicle trauma and 2 lost patients, Naomi sat in the cold kitchen alone. Her hands were sore, her back ached, and her scrubs smelled faintly of iron and iodine. Jeremiah came in and poured her a cup of tea. "You don't have to keep doing this," he said gently. "I know," she replied. They sat in silence for a while. Then Jeremiah added, "You've already done more than anyone else ever tried." Naomi didn't respond right away. She stared into the steam rising from her mug. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "He shouldn't be dying just because the system doesn't know how to price him." Jeremiah looked at her with something between gratitude and sadness. "I don't think I would have made it this long without your help." That night, Naomi walked home slowly. The streets were empty, and the air carried the weight of oncoming rain. Her phone buzzed twice in her pocket, messages from friends she hadn't seen in weeks. She ignored them. Her mind was already elsewhere. Something had to give. 3 weeks into her quiet rebellion, Naomi knew she was nearing a limit. Walter's breathing had grown shallower. Even with the painkillers, his body strained through every movement. And though Jeremiah tried to mask it, Naomi could see the dread in his eyes. He was bracing for goodbye. One Thursday afternoon, Naomi sat in the Hopeview break room with her head in her hands. She hadn't slept more than 5 hours in days. Her badge hung crooked from her collar, and the skin under her eyes had taken on a permanent shadow. Rochelle Banks, who hadn't pressed her in days, finally sat down beside her and asked, "How bad is it?" Naomi didn't have the energy to sugarcoat it. "He's running out of time." Rochelle nodded slowly, then leaned in. "Listen, I can't get him into the system. But there's something else. An old friend of mine freelances at the Eastwood Tribune. Sometimes she writes human interest pieces, real ones. No politics, just people." Naomi looked up, skeptical. "You want to tell them about Walter?" "I want to tell them the truth," Rochelle said. "If the hospitals won't listen to paperwork, maybe they'll listen to pressure." Naomi hesitated. Walter hadn't asked for attention, neither had Jeremiah. But then she thought of all the hours she had spent at that bedside, the silence, the resilience, the quiet injustice. Something had to break. "Give her my number," Naomi said. The call came that evening. A reporter named Marin DeWitt asked for an hour. Naomi gave her 3. She told her everything, about Walter's history as a beloved principal, about the hospitals that turned him away, about the trial treatment that had remained just out of reach. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. 3 days later, the article dropped online and hit the Sunday paper. A principal's final lesson: what happens when the system forgets you. The piece was raw and respectful. It detailed Walter's career, his impact on Eastwood's school children, and the quiet desperation of his final year. At the end, the reporter had added a short paragraph. "If you are a medical professional, administrator, or donor able to help, please contact the Tribune. Walter Cole still has a chance, if someone is willing to take it." By Monday morning, Naomi's phone hadn't stopped ringing. There were calls from readers, messages from local nurses and retired doctors. Even Rochelle was stunned. "I've never seen a response like this," she said. "People are furious, and they want to help." But the moment came quietly, buried in a wave of emails. An assistant from a nonprofit called Hope Horizon Foundation reached out. A donor, anonymous, high-profile, and local, had read the article. He offered to cover the full cost of Walter's treatment, including transport, hospitalization, and trial medication. No conditions, no red tape, just compassion. Naomi read the email 3 times before believing it. When Naomi arrived that evening, she wasn't in scrubs. She wore jeans and a clean white blouse, and the moment she stepped inside, Jeremiah could tell something was different. Her posture wasn't weighed down. Her face carried something neither of them had seen in weeks. "You might want to sit," she said. Jeremiah leaned against the kitchen counter while Naomi pulled out her phone and opened the email from the Hope Horizon Foundation. She didn't speak as she handed it over, just watched his eyes scan the screen. By the time he reached the final sentence, his hands were shaking. "They said yes?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "All of it. Evaluation, trial admission, post-op care. The donor's covering everything." Jeremiah pressed both palms to his face, then exhaled so sharply it almost turned into a sob. Naomi gave him a moment, then she stepped into the bedroom to tell Walter. She sat on the edge of the bed, leaned in gently, and said, "Mr. Cole, we found someone. They're going to treat you. You're going to be seen." Walter didn't speak for a while. His lips parted slightly, his eyes welled, but the tears didn't fall. He reached for her hand, slowly, shakily, and gripped it with surprising strength. "I thought they were done with me," he said. "They were," Naomi replied. "But we're not." The following week moved quickly. Paperwork was expedited. Hopeview connected with the hospital participating in the drug trial. Transport was arranged, and a private room was prepared for Walter's pre-op treatment. On the day of the procedure, Naomi rode with Jeremiah in the back of the medical van. Walter wore a new pair of socks, navy with yellow stars, that Jeremiah had picked out the night before. He said they were for luck. The surgery was delicate but successful. The medication trial began the next morning. Naomi checked in daily, not as a nurse, but as family. Walter's recovery was slow but steady. Within weeks, he could sit up on his own and speak without gasping. The trial medication was working. Doctors were cautious but hopeful. Jeremiah never left his side, and Naomi checked in regularly, no longer as a nurse, but as someone who had chosen to care. By the 3rd month, she returned to full shifts at Hopeview. Her days were just as long, but the weight had shifted. She walked through the hospital with quiet resolve, no longer burdened by helplessness. Whispers followed her. The Tribune article had made its rounds, but Naomi never spoke of it. The work spoke louder. One afternoon, Jeremiah arrived with a small bag. Inside was a card from Walter, handwritten, shaky but clear, "You saw me when others didn't." That saved my life. Naomi sat with it that night, holding it longer than she expected. She remembered the knock, the fear, the choice to listen anyway. Now, months later, Walter no longer needed her visits. He was stronger. Jeremiah was working again, and Naomi, when riding the Briarwood line home, would sometimes glance down the carriage out of habit, not fear. There was no one watching, because this time, the story had already been rewritten. Sometimes the people we fear the most are the ones who need us most. Naomi chose compassion, and it saved a life. If a stranger knocked on your door asking for help, would you have trusted them and opened your door? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.